The loud bang of a car door snapped me out of my sleep. It wasn't just some distant noise from the street. It wasn't a neighbor arriving home after a late night. No, it was far too close. Right outside my window. For a brief moment, I stayed frozen, listening intently. The room was engulfed in darkness. The only light was the faint glow of the digital clock on the nightstand reading 3:12 a.m. Everything around the house was unnervingly still, silent. The only noise was the soft hum of the ceiling fan above me, its steady whir cutting through the oppressive quiet of the night. Something about that sound, something about the whole moment felt wrong. I reached out across the bed, blindly searching in the dark. My fingers found nothing but empty sheets. Cold. Karen wasn't here. A knot tightened in my stomach as my mind raced for an explanation. She had said she was going to a bachelorette party at her friend Nancy's place. I could still hear her words clearly in my head, how casually she mentioned it earlier as she was getting ready. "Just the girls," she had said, sliding a bracelet onto her wrist. "We'll probably just have some wine. Play some silly games, the usual. I'll be back late, but wait up." I had nodded along, not thinking much of it at the time. But now, sitting upright in our dark bedroom, I realized that late had turned into something else entirely. I pushed the covers aside and stood, my bare feet meeting the chill of the hardwood floor. My heart raced, not in a panic, but in the slow, creeping way it does when your body picks up on something being wrong, even before your mind fully catches on. The emptiness of the room without Karen's presence felt unsettling. Her scent, a soft hint of lavender from her lotion, still clung to her pillow. Yet the cold sheets confirmed she hadn't been in bed for hours. I strained my ears to listen again. Outside, there was nothing. No more car doors slamming. No footsteps crunching on the gravel. Just silence. Had I imagined it? I moved cautiously toward the window, keeping my movements light and deliberate. Parting the curtain just slightly, I peered out into the dark. The street was still, as it always was at this hour. The streetlight by our house flickered weakly, casting an orange hue across the pavement. But just past the light, parked across the road, was a black sedan. The engine hummed steadily. My breath caught. The driver's side door hung open. I couldn't make out anyone inside, but something about the scene stirred an unease deep in my chest. Why would a car be parked there at 3 in the morning, just after I'd heard that door slam? Part of me wanted to brush it off, tell myself it was nothing. Just a coincidence, a neighbor coming home late, someone getting dropped off, but I knew this neighborhood. I knew the usual cars. And that one? It didn't belong here. A sense of dread settled heavily in my stomach as I let the curtain fall back into place. Turning toward the bedroom door, my mind raced with possibilities. Karen was supposed to be at Nancy's, but if she had just been dropped off, why hadn't I heard her walk up the driveway? Why hadn't I heard the familiar sound of her keys jingling as she unlocked the front door? She was always a bit clumsy when she returned from a night out, kicking off her shoes loudly, tossing her purse on the counter. But tonight, there was nothing. A horrible thought crept into the back of my mind. Was she trying not to wake me? I stepped cautiously into the hallway, staying in the shadows. The house felt different in the dark, longer, heavier. The walls seemed to stretch just a little more. The silence pressed in from all sides. I strained to listen. Then came a faint click, the unmistakable sound of the front door unlocking. My breath stopped. Karen was just now coming in. But if she was only just entering, then who had slammed that car door outside? The realization sent a shiver down my spine. I moved toward the stairs, pausing at the top, careful to remain hidden in the shadows. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the entryway below. The door opened just about a crack, then a little more, and then slowly, far too slowly, all the way. A figure stepped inside. It was Karen. She moved quietly, unnervingly so. She shut the door behind her with deliberate, practiced motions, as if she had done this many times before, as if she knew she couldn't afford to make a sound. My pulse pounded in my ears as I watched her. She stood there for a moment, still as stone. Her posture was casual, not guilty, not rushed. There was no panic in her actions, no sign of being caught doing something wrong. This was routine to her. That realization brought a completely different kind of chill. Karen bent down, carefully sliding off her heels instead of letting them crash to the floor like she normally did. She set them aside, letting out a quiet sigh as she ran a hand through her slightly disheveled hair. Her makeup was smeared. The sleek, short black dress she was wearing, one I hadn't seen her leave in, was wrinkled. Then, as she turned, something else hit me with the force of a punch to the gut. She smelled like cologne, but it wasn't mine. A wave of nausea surged up my throat. I wanted to find some innocent explanation for all this. I desperately needed to believe there was one. But deep down, I already knew. Something was terribly wrong. Karen had no idea I was watching her. I remained frozen at the top of the stairs, my heart thudding in my chest, each beat loud in my ears. She stood there in the dim light of the entryway, completely unaware that I was observing her. She exhaled deeply, stretching her neck, rolling her shoulders as though relieved to be home, like this was normal for her. She bent down, grabbed her purse, and started moving toward the hallway. That was when the kitchen light illuminated her face just enough for me to notice things I hadn't seen before. Her lipstick was smeared at the corner of her mouth. There was a faint red stain on the collar of her dress, barely visible, but now that I was looking, it was unmistakable. And suddenly, I wasn't just frozen, I was numb. The room around me blurred. My pulse pounded in my ears, my stomach churned, twisting with sickness, as though I might throw up right there on the stairs, because there was no longer any innocent explanation for this. No more excuses, no more justifications. Karen had come home at 3 in the morning, creeping in as quietly as possible. She smelled of cologne. Her makeup was smudged. Her dress was different from the one she left in. And now, standing there, I realized something that made my blood run cold. She never even texted me. No simple heading home message. No sorry, running late. Not even a lie about staying out longer than expected. For years, Karen had always kept me updated. She would send little messages when she went out, when she arrived, when she was on her way back. But tonight, nothing. It was like she had purposely kept me in the dark. I swallowed hard, forcing down the bile that threatened to rise in my throat. I should have confronted her right then, should have rushed down the stairs and demanded an explanation. But I didn't confront her. Instead, I stayed frozen, hidden in the shadows, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. And then, suddenly, another thought struck me. Susan, Karen's old friend, the one she no longer spoke to, the one Karen had called toxic, jealous, obsessed with drama. The same Susan who, just hours ago, had sent me a message I hadn't wanted to believe. You deserve to know the truth. Attached was a photo, and I had ignored it. At the time, I assumed Susan was just stirring up trouble again. She and Karen had a falling out a while ago, and I thought this was just another one of Susan's attempts to get back at her. But now, within the sounds of the dark house, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had made a mistake. With my breath caught in my throat, I slowly stepped back from the staircase, moving cautiously to avoid the creaky floorboards beneath me. I moved like a shadow through the hallway, my fingers trembling as I grabbed my phone. The screen lit up, blinding me for a moment. I saw Susan's message sitting in my notifications. Still unopened, I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to open it, because once I did, I'd have to face whatever truth was inside. But I already knew something was wrong. I already knew Karen wasn't the woman I thought she was anymore. I drew in a deep breath and tapped the message. The photo loaded in an instant. It was grainy, taken in a dimly lit bar, but the two people in it were unmistakable. Karen, sitting on a bar stool, her legs crossed, leaning in toward a man. A man with his arm wrapped around her waist, possessively holding her close. Not at Nancy's, not at a bachelorette party, not with the girls, with him. My grip tightened around the phone as a rush of adrenaline flooded my veins. Susan had sent me the proof, and I had ignored it like a fool. And now Karen was right downstairs, acting as though nothing had happened. I glanced toward the bedroom, toward the bed where I should have been sleeping, where she thought I was sleeping. If I hadn't woken up, would she have climbed into bed beside me and pretended everything was fine? Would she have kissed me with those same lips that had just been on someone else? Would she have looked me in the eye in the morning, lying and telling me she still loved me? My breathing grew uneven. I felt hot, then cold, then hot again. It was as though my body couldn't decide whether to explode with rage or collapse under the weight of everything crashing down around me. I needed to move. I had to do something before I completely lost my hold on reality. I walked stiffly toward the bathroom, locking the door behind me. The person staring back at me in the mirror was someone I barely recognized. Wide, frantic eyes, a clenched jaw, a man teetering on the edge of something dark. My hands were still trembling as I tapped my screen once more, pulling up Karen's contact. I stared at her name. I could call her now, could ask her directly, force her to confess, or she could lie again. I closed her messages and scrolled down. My chest tightened as my finger hovered over the unfamiliar number that had appeared under my recent calls. The same number Karen had been texting all week. A cold, seething rage began to churn in my stomach as I opened the call log. It wasn't just one message, not even just a few. There were dozens. Late at night, early in the morning, random times throughout the day, and every single one had been deleted, except for the most recent one, the one that had just lit up her phone. Right now, while she was downstairs acting like everything was fine, a message from that same number. Miss you. The last shred of doubt snapped. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This was the truth. Karen had no idea what was coming. I stood there in the dark bathroom, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, my pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out the quiet hum of the house. Miss you. That message was still glowing on Karen's phone screen. Sitting downstairs, waiting for me to pick it up and see it all. I should have been consumed by rage. I should have stormed down there, confronted her, demanded answers, but all I felt was cold, empty, because deep down I already knew the truth. Karen wasn't coming home to me tonight. She had already been with someone else, and now she was standing in my house, in the same space we had shared, carrying the weight of another man's scent on her skin. I exhaled, forcing myself to move, to push through the fog clouding my mind. Slowly, I turned the doorknob, stepping out into the hallway. The air felt thick now, suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of deception. She was still downstairs. I could faintly hear her moving through the kitchen. A cabinet door creaked open. Then the soft clink of glass. She was pouring herself some water. Composed. Unaffected. This wasn't a woman sneaking in after making a mistake, drowning in guilt and regret. Karen was calm, because this wasn't new to her. Another wave of nausea washed over me, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't going to let her see me like this, shaken, unraveling. I needed to see just how far she would carry the lie. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the staircase. From where I stood, I could see her at the kitchen sink, her back to me. Her long hair draped over her shoulder as she took a slow sip from the glass, one hand resting on the counter. Her posture was too at ease, like she had just returned from a long day at work, like she hadn't just spent the night with another man. I watched her for a moment, letting the sight of her sink in. The same woman I had loved for years, the same woman I had imagined a future with. And now she was someone I didn't even recognize. The air between us crackled with tension, filled with something unspoken. I could hear my heartbeat steady, slow, but I didn't move. Not yet. Karen exhaled, setting the glass down with a soft clink. Then, as if sensing something, she finally turned. Our eyes met. For just a split second, her expression faltered, a brief flicker of surprise. She hadn't expected me to be awake, but almost immediately she masked it, slipping effortlessly back into normalcy. "Oh," she breathed, pressing a hand to her chest. "You scared me. I didn't think you'd be up." Her voice was steady, casual, too casual. I stayed silent. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "Are you okay?" A bitter laugh almost escaped me. Was I okay? No, I wasn't okay. I was standing in my own home, staring at the woman who had spent the night with someone else, who had kissed him, let him touch her. And now she had the nerve to stand there, acting like nothing was wrong. She stood there, acting as if nothing had happened. And the worst part? She was good at it. There was no panic in her, no stumbling over excuses or tripping up on her lies. No, Karen had done this before. That realization settled like a weight in my stomach, rooting me in something cold and undeniable. This wasn't a one-off mistake. This was something she had learned to hide. I forced my voice to stay steady. "What time did you get home?" Karen glanced at the stove clock as if she hadn't already rehearsed her answer. "Just a little while ago," she replied, moving to the counter. She set her purse down like it was an ordinary evening. "We stayed later than I thought," she continued. "Nancy opened another bottle of wine, and we lost track of time." She gave me a small, apologetic smile. I should have texted. Should have. But she hadn't. And here she was, standing in front of me, feeding me the same lie. I studied her carefully, looking for any cracks, looking for any hint, any sign that might expose her. But she was perfect. I'd watched men bluff their way through poker games. I'd seen people lie under pressure. I'd spent years learning to spot the signs of deceit. But Karen was a natural. And maybe that, more than anything, was the most painful realization. "How was the party?" I asked, keeping my voice light, playing along. Karen stretched her arms overhead, letting out a soft sigh. "Oh, the usual. Silly games, too much wine. Nancy made these ridiculous little cupcakes that were supposed to look like, well, never mind." She chuckled quietly, shaking her head. "It was fun." I nodded slowly, pretending to believe her, pretending that I hadn't just seen the evidence on my phone, pretending that I didn't already know the truth. Karen ran a hand through her hair, her fingers grazing the smudge of lipstick at the corner of her mouth. A part of me wondered if she even noticed it, if she had checked her reflection before walking inside, if the other man had kissed her one last time before she got out of the car. My jaw tightened, but I kept my face neutral. "What about you?" Karen asked, leaning casually against the counter. "Did you have a good night?" I let her question hang in the air between us. It was almost laughable how she pretended to care, acting as if she genuinely wanted to know that how my evening went while she had been with someone else. Keeping my voice steady took every ounce of effort I had left. Yeah, I answered, nodding. Pretty quiet. Karen smiled, completely unaware that the carefully built world she had created was on the verge of falling apart. I stood in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at her phone lying face up on the table, the message still shining on the screen. The house was unnervingly quiet, the only sound being the distant rush of the shower from down the hall. She was in there now, washing away the remnants of the night, removing any trace of him, before slipping into bed beside me as though nothing had happened, like she hadn't just been with another man, like she hadn't kissed me with the same lips that had kissed him, like she hadn't just walked in here expecting me to buy her lies. The anger inside me had shifted into something else, something sharper, colder. No more doubt, no more second guessing, no more wishful thinking that somehow maybe I had misunderstood it all. I knew the truth, and Karen, she had no idea that the world she had worked so hard to build was about to crumble. Sitting at the table, I drummed my fingers on the wood, my eyes fixed on her phone, watching the message blink at me. Can you talk? The arrogance, the nerve. I could only imagine what he thought now. Maybe he was lying in his bed, relaxed and satisfied, waiting for her to sneak off and call him once I was asleep. Maybe he believed he'd won, that he could take something from me without consequence, that this would continue until I eventually figured it out, too late to do anything. But he was wrong. I wasn't playing by his rules. I unlocked the phone again and scrolled through the call logs, seeing the same number she had been dialing for weeks, maybe months. The texts were gone, but the pattern, it was clear. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. I could end it now. I could take her phone, call him myself, let him hear my voice instead of hers. I could send him a message, something short, something that would destroy the illusion they had built. But as my thumb hovered over the screen, I realized something. I didn't want to talk to him. I wanted him to feel the same shock I had felt. I wanted her to be the one who unraveled. I put the phone back where she had left it, then leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. The shower had finished. Moments later, I heard the faint creak of the door, followed by soft footsteps down the hall. Karen stepped into the doorway, wrapped in a towel, her hair still damp, her face bare, free of makeup. She met my gaze with weary eyes, completely unaware that this would be the final time she'd walk through that door as my wife. "You're still awake?" she murmured, drying her hair with the towel, her tone casual, as if we were any other couple winding down after a long day. "I thought you'd be asleep by now." I didn't respond immediately. I just studied her. For years, I had trusted this woman. I had built a life with her, made sacrifices, believed in her, and night after night, she had lied to my face. Something in my expression must have unsettled her, because she paused for just a moment before stepping closer. A faint, uncertain smile curved her lips. "Hey," she said softly, reaching out for my arm. "Are you okay?" I let her touch me, let her continue playing her part, letting her believe she still had control. Then finally, I spoke. "I know, just 2 words. That was all it took." Karen's hand stilled against my skin. Her smile faltered, confusion flashing across her face. "Know what?" she asked, her voice too quick. The hesitation, the fear in her eyes, that was my answer. I stood slowly, the chair scraping across the floor as I pushed it back. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't insult me by pretending." Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching just enough for me to hear it. She was scrambling now, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much she could salvage, but there was nothing left to save. "I don't," I said. Her voice cracked, and in that moment I saw it, the first real crack in her armor. I moved past her, heading toward the living room, each step making me feel lighter. Weeks of lies, months of being made a fool, but not anymore. Karen turned, eyes wide, watching me, her towel clutched tightly around her, as if she suddenly realized how exposed she was. "Where are you going?" Her voice trembled now, but I didn't look at her. "Packing your things." A strangled sound escaped her throat. "Wait," she said quickly, stepping toward me. Can we talk about this? Please?" I laughed. Actually laughed. Shaking my head, I pulled open the closet and grabbed the first bag I saw. "Talk?" I repeated. "Now you want to talk?" Karen flinched. "I made a mistake," she whispered, desperation creeping into her voice. Charles, I love you, please." "You don't love me." The words came out steady, controlled, because I had already accepted it all, had already come to terms with the truth. "You love the convenience I provide. You love having someone to come home to after you've done whatever the hell you want. But that's not love, Karen." Her lip quivered. "It wasn't serious," she begged. It was a mistake." That word, that damn word. I turned sharply, locking eyes with her, something cold and final in my gaze. A mistake happens once, I said. A mistake is regretting something the moment it happens. A mistake isn't months of sneaking around, lying to my face, deleting messages, coming home at 3 in the morning and pretending nothing is wrong. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't interested in hearing the excuse she was about to make. I pointed toward the door. Get out! Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Out. For a moment, she just stared at me, as though she couldn't believe this was real, as if she thought she could talk her way out of it. But she had played her last card, and I wasn't holding the deck anymore. She turned without a word, shoulders shaking as she rushed to the bedroom, pulling clothes from hangers, grabbing shoes, stuffing things into a duffel bag with frantic, jerky movements. I stood in the doorway watching as she hastily packed. Her hands trembled. Her world was falling apart. 5 minutes later, she stood in the entryway, bag over her shoulder, her face streaked with silent tears. She looked at me one last time, her lips parting, hoping for one last plea, one final thing she could say to make me change my mind. But there was nothing left to say. I reached for the door, opening it, and without another word, I shut it behind her. The silence that followed was deafening, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel empty. It felt like freedom.